Have you ever wondered how far love can push you? What if the person you trusted most was slowly drifting away, into the arms of an ex? In this story, meet Jake, a man torn between his loyalty and the deep, gut-wrenching fear of betrayal. Mia's sudden decision to move across the world to be closer to her ex forces Jake to face the reality of his insecurities, but nothing could prepare him for the shocking plan Mia reveals. This isn't just a story about love, it's about deception, jealousy, and a twisted fate no one saw coming. Let's dive into one of the most intense relationship dramas you'll ever hear. My name is Jake, and I'm 24 years old, working as a project manager at a tech startup in Seattle. It's a job I threw myself into right out of college. Long hours, tight deadlines, and the constant adrenaline rush of building something from scratch. And while I loved it, there were nights where the office felt emptier than it should, no matter how many people were there. It wasn't until Mia came into my life that I realized exactly what had been missing. Mia. Just saying her name makes me smile. She's 22, studying graphic design and art history down in Portland. She's got this effortless warmth about her, like she could sit down next to a stranger, and within minutes have them laughing and opening up about their lives. The first time I saw her, it was like that laugh of hers cut through everything around me. We met a few years back during an open mic night at a college cafe in Seattle. I had just tagged along with some buddies, looking to unwind after a long week at work. The night was typical Seattle, raining lightly, the smell of damp earth filling the air. Inside, the cafe was cozy, filled with students and locals trying to escape the rain. I remember scanning the crowd and catching a glimpse of her, laughing at something her friend said. She looked so genuinely happy, so at ease, that I found myself crossing the room half nervous, to introduce myself. From there, it was like everything clicked into place. We spent hours talking, sharing stories, and by the time the cafe closed, neither of us wanted to say goodbye. Over the next few months, we became inseparable. When I wasn't at the office, I was driving down to Portland to spend time with her, and when she could, she'd come up to Seattle. Those weekends felt like mini vacations, nights of cooking together, watching movies, and just escaping from everything else. We'd explore the city hand in hand, finding hidden bookstores and coffee shops, having lazy brunches, and losing track of time. She made Seattle feel new, made it feel like a place worth calling home. Our relationship had its challenges, mostly the 6-hour drive separating us. But we found a rhythm. After a late Friday night at work, I'd hop in my car, make the drive down to Portland, and squeeze every second of time with her before heading back to Seattle Sunday night. It was exhausting but worth it, every single time. That drive, no matter how late or how tired I was, became a small sacrifice to feel close to her. We even started building a little life around our long-distance love. Her friends became mine, and mine became hers. Mia's friends down in Portland, a quirky group of artists and musicians, embraced me like one of their own. Her best friend Alice would jokingly call me the Weekender, a nickname that somehow stuck. They'd invite us over for bonfires, little gallery shows, or late-night card games. We'd all laugh about how someday, we wouldn't have to count down the hours left until I had to leave. About 6 months ago, the idea of a future together went from a someday to an actual plan. We'd spend nights talking about what it would look like. Maybe I'd move to Portland, or she'd come up to Seattle. It wasn't just wishful thinking anymore. We were talking details, looking at apartments online, talking about furniture we'd need. In my mind, I could see it all. Coming home from a long day at the office to find her there, having coffee together every morning, knowing that she was no longer a 6-hour drive away. We'd even started to plan out how I'd help her settle into the professional world once she graduated. I could connect her with designers in Seattle, help her find the right opportunities. It was exciting. For the first time, my life wasn't just about work, promotions, or the next big project. It was about building something that felt like home. Like a life with her. It was late one evening. Mia and I were on our usual video call after a long day. She'd been talking about a new art project, her excitement spilling over as she described each detail, and I was hanging on to every word, happy to see her so animated. For me, it was those little moments that made the distance feel less. But as the conversation started to wind down, she dropped it. Right out of the blue. I want to move to Australia for a while, she said, her tone oddly calm, as if it were a causal decision. I thought she was joking at first. I laughed, but the sound quickly faded as I realized she wasn't laughing along. There was something almost steely in her eyes, like she had thought this over and was sure about it. 2 years, she added, staring at me through the screen, with a serious expression that sent a chill down my spine. I felt the air leave the room, and I managed a weak, "Wait, Australia?" But then, she hit me with the real shock. Her ex was there. Not only was he there, but he had offered to help her settle in and provide financial support if she needed it. I felt my stomach twist in an ugly knot of surprise, and something more intense, something raw, jealousy maybe, mixed with a sense of betrayal that I couldn't quite understand. Why him? I kept thinking. I'd always known they were friends, sure, but this was different. She was planning to rely on him. I tried to stay calm, keep my face neutral, but the questions started pouring out of me, one after the other. Why him, Mia? Why do you even need his help? You have me here. She seemed almost taken aback by my reaction, like she hadn't expected me to feel so rattled. Her answer was practiced, too calm, and each word felt like it was designed to diffuse my feelings rather than address them. She kept saying things like, "It's just for practical reasons," and "He's nothing more than a friend now." She went on, explaining that he was offering her stability in a new place and would help her get her footing. She said it so matter-of-factly, as if this was the most reasonable, logical plan in the world. But to me, it was absurd. Here I was, working to make a life together for us, and she was telling me she was about to cross oceans to live near the one person who used to have her heart. I struggled to find the right words, the right way to convey what I felt. "Mia, I don't get it," I said, probably sounding more desperate than I meant to. "I mean, this is huge. We've been planning our future here together. And now you want to leave all that, and me, behind? For him?" She sighed, brushing her hair back in that way she does when she's frustrated but trying to stay patient. "It's not about leaving you," she said, a touch of exasperation in her voice. "It's about getting out there, exploring a new place, having an experience. I just need a change, okay? And he's a friend who happens to be able to help." I felt like the walls were closing in. My chest was tight, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing her, that this plan of hers was slipping her further out of my reach. "You don't need his help, Mia," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "We're planning to build a life here together. Why is he even a factor in this?" She hesitated, then gave a small, almost sad smile, as if I were the one who didn't understand. "I just need to go, okay?" It wasn't just an idea I could brush off or a simple disagreement. The very thought of her moving halfway across the world, particularly to live near her ex, was a blow I hadn't seen coming. We had spent countless nights on video calls, dreaming up our shared future, building plans and promises that had kept us going despite the miles between us. And now, in a single conversation, she was flipping it all upside down. I decided to go see her in person to talk about this problem. I tried to reason with her, to bring up the future we'd already mapped out together. We were supposed to save up, find a place, and start a life we could both be proud of. I reminded her of the small details we'd shared, like getting a dog, which she had jokingly named Rocket, or our plans to road trip around the West Coast once we were finally in the same city. But as I talked, I could see her gaze drift, like none of it held the same weight it once did. It made me feel small, like I was clinging to something that was already slipping away. "I don't get it, Mia," I finally said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "We're just a few months away from being together for real. Why throw that away now, and for him of all people?" She rolled her eyes, and the casualness of her reaction stung. "I'm not throwing anything away. I just need some space, some freedom to explore. Australia is an opportunity for that." Her words sounded rehearsed, like she'd had this conversation in her head long before bringing it up with me. "But with him?" I shot back, the jealousy now boiling to the surface. "You really expect me to be okay with you spending time with your ex, the guy who was once everything to you? You say he's just a friend now, But can you really expect me to believe that when you're running off to him, instead of staying here with me? She took a long deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with an icy resolve. It's not about him, okay? It's about me. I need this. If you can't understand that, maybe you don't understand me as well as you think. Those words hit hard. I felt my stomach twist, my mind racing to make sense of what she was saying. Hadn't I been the one supporting her, listening to her dreams, cheering her on every step of the way? I had moved my life around to make this relationship work, always prioritizing her needs. And now she was suggesting that I, the person who had given so much, didn't understand her. We went back and forth, the argument escalating with each exchange. At one point I got up and started pacing, desperate for some way to get through to her. Mia, this isn't just a trip, okay? It's been 2 years. 2 years of us on opposite sides of the world. How am I supposed to believe you'll stay faithful? How am I supposed to believe that I'm still the one you want? She threw her hands up in exasperation. Why don't you trust me? Why are you so focused on him? Just because he's in Australia doesn't mean I'm running back into his arms. Then why him, Mia? Why does he have to be the one helping you? I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. There are plenty of ways you could explore, find freedom, or whatever you say you need, without him. But her response only confirmed the worst fears clawing at my heart. Because he understands me, she whispered, almost as if admitting it to herself more than to me. He knows what I've been through. He knows the side of me that you just don't get. I froze, my chest tightening. Those words, more than anything else, cut deeper than I could have imagined. I had tried so hard to be there for her, to be everything she needed, and now she was telling me I wasn't enough, that I somehow couldn't understand her in the way he did. For a second, I was too stunned to respond, the weight of her words settling over me like a cold fog. After a few moments of silence, I finally said, "So that's it? You're just leaving? For him?" My voice cracked slightly, betraying the hurt I was trying to keep hidden. "It's not about leaving you," she replied, but her words felt hollow. I'm not ready to be tied down. You want this life together, but I need time to figure out who I am outside of us." Her voice softened, and I could see a hint of guilt flicker across her face, but it did little to ease the sting. At that point, I felt a mix of anger and sadness, emotions swirling together in a storm that I couldn't control. "Mia," I said, my voice low, barely above a whisper, "if you go, I don't know if there's anything left for us to come back to." There was a long pause. She didn't say anything, didn't try to reassure me, or promise that things would work out. She just stood there, staring at the ground as if the weight of her decision was finally hitting her. And in that silence I felt the last threads of our relationship slipping through my fingers, leaving me alone, with nothing but the bitter taste of betrayal. As the days drifted by, Mia's determination to persuade me intensified. Each conversation seemed to unveil new layers of her plan, making it sound more meticulous, more foolproof. She was incredibly convincing, and each time she brought up the topic, she seemed to have thought of every angle. One evening, as the sun set and its warm light filled our living room, Mia leaned in closer, her eyes filled with that spark of conviction I'd seen in her before. She knew exactly how to approach this, choosing her words carefully, almost as if she were rehearsing lines that she'd crafted perfectly. "This arrangement is only temporary," she started, her tone calm and collected. 6 months, maybe a year at most. That's all. I just want to make sure we have a stable foundation, financially speaking, before we take the next steps together." Her words floated around the room, slowly starting to convince me. She painted the picture of a future where we'd both be free from financial stress, with savings that could sustain us and allow us to start the life we dreamed of. It sounded logical, reasonable. "Think of it as a stepping stone," she continued. "This will give us the breathing room we need. I could save up so much more, and by the time I come back, we could have a better life. More security. It'll be like pressing fast forward on everything we want." Her words were warm and gentle, coaxing, as she reached out and took my hand in hers. "Imagine it, babe. Both of us starting with no debts, no worries. Doesn't that sound like the perfect way to begin our life together?" I sat there, her words settling into my mind. Financially, It made sense. Her ex had a stable job, more money than either of us, and, according to her, was entirely willing to cover her living expenses. There was a logic to it, a strange kind of logic that pulled me in, even as I tried to resist. Still, I couldn't ignore the unease that gnawed at me. "Are you sure about him?" I finally asked, my voice carrying a trace of the distrust I felt. "Can he really be trusted to keep things friendly?" She let out a soft, almost reassuring laugh, as if I'd voiced some unfounded worry. "He and I are just friends now," she replied, her voice calm. "That part of our relationship is over. There's nothing left there, I promise." She gave my hand a reassuring squeeze, her eyes meeting mine with a steady gaze that seemed to melt my doubts. "He's just trying to help. He knows I'm with you. I think he just wants to do a good thing, you know?" There was a warmth to her words that was hard to resist. She was painting a picture of a pragmatic future, a practical solution to our present struggles, and the more she spoke, the more it seemed like the right thing to do. Mia had thought of everything. She talked about how the experience could be a chance for her to explore a new culture, see the world in a way that would broaden her perspective. She made it sound as if the entire situation could somehow enrich our relationship too. "When I come back," she said, leaning in with a smile, "I'll be bringing all of that experience with me, ready to build the future we've always talked about. I'll be more grounded, more sure of what I want." Her tone was so earnest that I could almost believe her, even if my heart was still conflicted. She even started mapping out how our finances would look after her time in Australia. She'd save a significant amount, she assured me, especially since her ex would be footing the bills. "Think of it," she said, her voice full of enthusiasm. "By the time I'm back, we could finally have enough for that little place we always talk about, our place. Maybe even get a dog, travel, or go back to school if we want to. Anything we want could be within reach." As she spoke, her words felt almost hypnotic, drawing me in. She painted a picture of a life together that was so vivid, so ideal, that I found myself nodding along, imagining it, as if it were already a reality. But something inside me still pulled back, a quiet voice, whispering doubts. I had to know if her commitment to me was genuine, if this plan was truly about us, or if it was something else. "Okay," I said slowly, feeling a strange mix of relief and trepidation. "But I need to know. I mean, what if things change? What if you start to feel differently?" My voice was barely a whisper by the end, exposing my vulnerability. She smiled softly, almost pityingly, as if she found my fears unnecessary. "Nothing is going to change between us," she assured me. "I've never been more certain about anything in my life. You are my future, my everything. This is just a way to make that future better, stronger." Her words were so comforting, so full of conviction, that I almost felt foolish for doubting her. "If you're sure," I started, and she cut me off with a confident nod. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "And once this is all behind us, we'll be able to look back on it and be glad we made this decision." It was one of those Seattle evenings, where the city lights reflected off the low clouds, giving everything an otherworldly glow. Mia and I sat across from each other, in my small downtown apartment, the warm glow of the city casting long shadows on the walls. I could feel the weight of the conversation about to unfold between us, and I took a deep breath before speaking, trying to steady the tremor of anxiety rising in my chest. "If this arrangement is really what you want," I began, my voice as calm as I could manage, "then I'll support you. But there have to be some ground rules." I forced myself to look directly into her eyes, my gaze steady even as my stomach twisted in knots. Mia nodded, her gaze meeting mine with what looked like a flicker of understanding, or maybe it was guilt. "Of course," she said softly, her voice encouraging me to continue. "First," I said, pausing to steady myself, "I need you to keep in close contact. Text me, call me, whatever it takes, so that I feel like I'm part of your life out there. I need to know what's happening, especially since you'll be around him." I couldn't keep a hint of bitterness from creeping into my voice when I mentioned her ex. The idea of her spending so much time with him was a tough pill to swallow, and the thought of them alone together gnawed at me. Still, I managed to keep my tone level, as if I was discussing a business arrangement instead of a test of our relationship. She reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing it in that comforting way that always managed to ease my mind. "Of course, Jake," she said, her voice gentle. "I'll keep you updated on everything. I don't want you to feel left out, never that." Her gaze held mine, as if trying to communicate the sincerity of her promise. Her words were soothing, a balm to the insecurities bubbling within me, though a part of me still felt uneasy. There was a pause, and I hesitated before bringing up my next condition, knowing how vulnerable it would make me sound. "And I need to be able to visit whenever I want. I don't want this distance to grow to the point where we feel like strangers to each other." Mia's face softened, and she gave me an enthusiastic nod. "I'd love that," she replied, a genuine excitement flickering in her eyes. "Honestly, I was hoping you'd say that. Australia's beautiful, Jake, and I'd love to show you around, introduce you to my friends out there. I can't wait to have you see it with me." Her enthusiasm felt real, but there was an odd feeling lingering in the background, a surrealness to this entire arrangement. This setup was supposed to be about securing our future, yet here I was, laying down boundaries just to feel like I wouldn't be forgotten. I took a deep breath and moved on to the third condition, feeling my heart pound harder. "And I need you to keep boundaries with him." The words came out more hesitant than I intended. "I get that you two are just friends now, but this is all new to me. I don't want you two spending too much time alone together. I need to know that I'm not." My voice caught in my throat, and I had to push the final words out. "That I'm not just a placeholder." Mia's expression softened, and she nodded without hesitation, squeezing my hand again as if to reassure me. "I promise, babe," she said earnestly. "He and I really are just friends. He knows about you, and he respects our relationship. If it helps you feel better, I won't be alone with him. I don't want you feeling uneasy about any of this." Hearing her say those words was like a soothing balm, calming the roiling storm of doubts inside me, at least temporarily. But even with her reassurances, there was still one last thing I had to address, one final fear gnawing at me that I couldn't ignore. Taking a shaky breath, I looked directly into her eyes. I just need to know, Mia. This is really about us, right? You're not using this as a way to explore anything else with him, are you?" My question hung in the air between us, heavy with the vulnerability I'd just exposed. Mia's face softened, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of pain in her expression. She let out a sigh before reaching across the table to pull me into a gentle embrace. "Oh, Jake," she whispered, her voice a mix of tenderness and gentle reprimand. Her fingers traced soft lines on my back as if to soothe away my fears. "It's not about that at all. I love you, and I want us to have a future together. This is just a temporary solution to help us get there, to build the life we've dreamed about. Please, don't doubt me like this. We're solid, Jake. I need you to trust me." Her words sank into me, each one dulling the sharp edges of my insecurities. One quiet evening, I settled into my chair for our nightly video call. Mia's face appeared on my screen, bathed in the warm, dim glow of her bedroom lamp. After a bit of small talk about her day, she leaned in, an unusual gleam in her eyes, and started detailing what she called a perfect plan. Her voice dropped to a hushed, almost conspiratorial tone, and it immediately drew me in. She explained that moving to Australia wasn't just an impulsive decision. It was part of a carefully crafted strategy. Her ex, now living comfortably overseas, had resources that could help her, and by extension us, financially. As she spoke, she described the arrangement in a way that almost made it sound like a smart business decision. "It's just for a while," she assured me, her voice calming and persuasive. "Think of it as taking an opportunity we'd be foolish to pass up." I could see her eyebrows raise slightly, as if inviting me to see the brilliance of her plan. The logic started to sink in. Sure, it felt uncomfortable imagining her with an ex, but she emphasized that they were just friends now, and that any emotional attachment had long faded. To her, this was simply a way to secure some extra support to start our life together on a solid foundation. "He's stable, he's got the funds, and honestly, he's still a bit hung up on me," she added, with a casual shrug that seemed almost playful. "Why shouldn't we make the most of it?" As the days passed, Mia continued to build layers into her plan, each time bringing up new angles that made it sound more enticing. During one video call, as she settled into her couch with a cup of tea, she painted a vision of our future so clear and compelling that I found myself starting to buy into it. She described the financial freedom we could have, how we wouldn't need to worry about rent or bills for a while, letting us save up for our own place, free from the weight of debt. Imagine coming home from work every day, knowing you don't have to stress about making rent or cutting back on little things, she mused, her voice filled with excitement. We could finally take those trips we've been talking about, explore the country, maybe even see Europe one day. Her smile was warm and genuine, and I could almost feel her enthusiasm reaching through the screen. In these conversations, Mia was persuasive, painting a life that seemed within our grasp if only we played our cards right. She mentioned how she'd handle her ex with ease, describing him as a bit clueless, but also generous to a fault, someone who would never think twice about lending a hand. But what if he gets suspicious? I asked, trying to mask the slight tremor in my voice. Or worse, what if he expects more than just friendship? Mia chuckled, her laugh soft but confident. Oh, please. He's harmless, really. All I have to do is act a bit vulnerable, mention how tough things have been, and he'll jump at the chance to help. He's always been like that. Besides, she said with a sly smile, I'll be careful to keep things strictly platonic. There's no way he'd ever think we're taking advantage. Her confidence was infectious, and little by little, her reassurances started to work. The idea of her being with her ex still felt strange, but Mia's explanations and her vision for our future had a way of silencing my doubts. One weekend night, we delved even deeper into her plan over a long phone call. She outlined step by step how she'd approach her ex, subtly dropping hints that she needed financial support without outright asking for it. He'll want to help, she assured me. I'll talk about how expensive everything is here, how I'd love to start fresh but don't have the resources, and let him think it's his idea to offer. The more she explained, the more sense it seemed to make, even if it still felt a bit uncomfortable. Each time I voiced a concern, she was quick to respond, her answers polished and full of conviction. So, I ventured, hesitating as the words formed, do you think he'll go along with all this without any strings attached? Trust me, she replied smoothly. He's always been a little naive when it comes to me. I'll keep things friendly but distant, just enough to keep him comfortable. He won't suspect a thing. She looked at me, her gaze softening as if sensing my unease. I know it's not conventional, she admitted. But it's only temporary, just long enough for us to get what we need. And then, once we're financially stable, I'll come back to you. We'll have the life we always talked about, without any financial burden. Her voice had a warmth to it, one that reassured me even as I wrestled with my mixed feelings. In the following days, as her departure date drew closer, Mia and I went over the details of her plan multiple times. She promised to stay in touch constantly, to update me every day, to never let the distance create any doubt between us. She assured me that she'd keep her ex at arm's length emotionally and physically, making it clear that her commitment to me hadn't wavered. I want this for us, she said softly during one of our last calls before her flight. It might sound crazy, but I'm doing this because I believe in us. This is just a stepping stone, a small sacrifice for a future where we're secure and can be together, without financial worries holding us back. Looking into her eyes through the screen, I could see the sincerity in her expression, and any remaining hesitation melted away. With a deep breath, I gave my final nod of approval, trusting her with not only her plan but with my heart. Okay, I said, my voice steady but tinged with anticipation. If this is what you think will help us, then I'll support it. Just don't forget why we're doing this. I won't, she replied, her eyes bright with determination. This is for us. As the days turned into weeks since Mia moved to Australia, the feeling of unease in my chest began to grow heavier. Despite her regular calls and reassuring messages, my mind couldn't shake the idea that something wasn't right. Each morning, I'd wake up hoping the familiar ding of my phone meant a message from her, but even those texts began to feel distant, like they came from a world I was no longer a part of. The time difference didn't help. Her mornings were my nights, and our conversations began to feel like they were just fitting around the edges of her new life, rather than being central to it. Mia would often mention her everyday moments in Australia, adding in anecdotes about her best friend, her ex, almost as if his presence was nothing out of the ordinary. She talked about their casual dinners, their evening strolls around Sydney's vibrant neighborhoods, and the times they'd get coffee at some local cafe she'd grown fond of. But every mention of him sent a pang through my chest, like a silent alarm going off in the back of my mind. Each story about him was a reminder of the distance between us, both physical and emotional. One evening, as I sat in our favorite local diner back home, scrolling through photos of Mia with her friend in different picturesque Australian spots, the jealousy flared up so intensely that I felt I could barely breathe. I stared at the pictures, dissecting every smile, every look, every gesture between them. Were they really just friends, or was I fooling myself by believing her reassurances? Unable to hold it in, I brought it up during our next video call. It was late for me, close to midnight, and she was just starting her day. "Mia," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't understand why you need to spend so much time with him. You said this was for us, but sometimes it feels like you're building a life over there without me." She looked at me through the screen, her expression a mix of sympathy and exasperation. "Oh, come on, babe," she said, her voice gentle, trying to soothe me. He's just a friend, that's all. We've been through this. I'm there for us, not him, you know that." Every time she said those words they felt hollow, like she was only saying them to keep me in line. But even with my doubts, I couldn't seem to voice them completely. I felt trapped between the love I had for her and the fear that I was slowly losing her. I asked her, "But Mia, if you're there for us, why does it feel like you're spending so much time with him? I mean, we talk less now, and sometimes it feels like you're pushing me aside." She sighed, her shoulders drooping slightly. "You're overthinking this, really," she insisted. "He's helping me adjust, that's all. I'm in a new country, and he's just a familiar face. It's nothing more than that." At that moment, a wave of frustration washed over me. I wanted to believe her so badly, to trust that everything was as she said. But each word she said felt like it carried a hint of defensiveness, a subtle deflection. "If it's really nothing, then why do you have to spend so much time together?" I pushed further, hearing the desperation in my own voice. Mia's expression softened, and she looked at me with a patience that only made me feel worse. "I'm doing this for us, remember?" she reminded me, her voice calm and reassuring. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't for our future together. You just have to trust me, okay? Please, don't let this ruin us." I wanted to trust her, but every time I imagined her laughing with him, sharing moments that used to be ours, the jealousy gnawed at me, leaving me feeling hollow and weak. I would lie awake at night, wondering if I was being unreasonable, if my jealousy was a flaw that I needed to control. But every image of them together haunted me, each one a reminder of the life she was living without me. The following months became a blur of strategic calls and whispered conversations. Mia and I were entwined in the plan, refining every detail, every angle. She had worked her way so deeply into her ex's life that he hardly ever questioned her motives. The two of them had re-established an apparent trust, one that she skillfully manipulated with her charm and constant reassurances. With each interaction, she painted a vision of a future that her ex desperately wanted to believe, convincing him that the sacrifices he was making for her were investments in their supposed future together. Our nightly calls became a mix of excitement and tense anticipation. She would tell me about each step of her progress, detailing how she carefully drew him in deeper. I listened intently, supporting her from afar, feeling as though each account she shared was another step toward our shared goal. I remember one specific evening. It was late, the room dark, save for the glow of my phone screen, and her voice came through clear and confident, almost triumphant. "He gave me access to his accounts today," she murmured, barely concealing her satisfaction. There was an undercurrent of exhilaration in her voice, as if we were both conspirators in a high-stakes heist. "He even told me the PIN code, thinking it was a sign of trust," she added, laughing softly. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction, a twisted sense of victory, that we were nearing the finish line. Weeks passed, and our plan continued to unfold flawlessly. Mia would update me on the various assets her ex allowed her to manage, properties he transferred under her name for tax purposes, and the savings he moved to joint accounts he believed were the foundation of their future. His trust in her was absolute, and he had no idea he was merely a pawn in our elaborate scheme. As the final stage of our plan drew near, Mia's texts became shorter, less descriptive. She was nervous, concerned that he might sense something was amiss. "What if he catches on?" she asked me one night, her voice laced with anxiety. But I reassured her, telling her that we had come this far, that there was no turning back. "Just a bit longer," I said, "and this will all be behind us." The day finally came. With the final transfer completed, Mia severed all ties with her ex. She closed down every joint account, redirected funds to secure, private accounts we'd set up, and as the last cruel twist, changed the locks on the property he had transferred to her. That night, she called me, her voice filled with a mix of relief and exhilaration. "It's done," she whispered, barely containing her excitement. "We finally have everything." But the victory came with an unexpected, somber twist. Mere hours later, she received a message from one of his friends. Her ex had found out, and the devastation had crushed him. The carefully crafted web of promises, the future he thought they were building together, it had all unraveled in a matter of moments. His life was shattered. The person he trusted most had betrayed him, and he was left with nothing. Once Mia and I had everything we'd plotted to take, our lives changed practically overnight. We moved to a new place together, one that was leagues away from the small apartment I had been used to. It was luxurious in a way that felt surreal. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, marble countertops, gleaming appliances that I barely knew how to use. Every corner of our new life spoke of wealth, accomplishment, and power. For a while, I let myself get caught up in it, convincing myself that we deserved this. We began to indulge in luxuries I had only seen in movies. We dined at high-end restaurants where every dish was an artwork, served by waiters who treated us with reverence. Mia filled our closets with designer clothes, insisting that now, we looked the part. She started spending on spa days, exotic weekend getaways, and penthouse parties, rubbing elbows with people who seemed just as self-assured and ambitious as she was. We traveled to New York and Miami, places where we were just two more faces in a glamorous crowd, but felt like we finally belonged. At first, I wanted to believe that all of it was worth the cost. Mia and I threw ourselves into the high life, living like nothing mattered outside our bubble of money and excess. I convinced myself that we'd both earned this, that the sacrifices made along the way were simply part of reaching for something bigger. But as time passed, the sheen of luxury began to wear off. In quiet moments, I would find myself thinking back to how we'd gotten here, unable to shake the uneasy feeling that clung to me. Every indulgence felt more hollow than the last. I thought the money would change everything, that it would make me feel secure, fulfilled. But the more I bought, the more I realized it could never fill the emptiness I felt. I looked at what we'd achieved together. A future seemingly within our grasp, financial security, freedom from constraints, and felt a momentary satisfaction. But that rush faded fast, replaced by a hollow emptiness that crept up on me day by day. My mind constantly replayed the aftermath, the shattered life we left behind, the man who, until the very end, had trusted someone he thought cared for him. And for what? A plan we'd convinced ourselves was worth the sacrifice. As the days passed, the weight of what we'd done settled heavily on me. I watched Mia embrace her new lifestyle, unbothered and almost celebratory. She had no regrets, no signs of guilt. While I struggled with dark, restless nights, Mia moved on with startling ease. She spoke about her plans and the new doors now open to her, treating our scheme as a clever move rather than the moral catastrophe it truly was. Her joy in the newfound wealth only deepened my own unease. One evening, weeks after everything had ended, I sat alone on my balcony, the city lights stretching out endlessly before me. The feeling of emptiness had only grown, and I found myself questioning everything. How had I allowed my love for Mia to push me down such a dark path? I'd given up pieces of myself, in the name of love and loyalty. But for what? The cost of that loyalty was a life, a person who had trusted Nia with his heart and was repaid with utter betrayal. I realized I couldn't silence the guilt gnawing at me, couldn't ignore the haunting truth that we had pushed someone to their breaking point. And then there was Mia. Her indifference began to frighten me. I had once admired her ambition, her drive, but now that same determination looked more like bottomless greed. I started seeing her in a new light, recognizing a ruthlessness in her that both repelled and terrified me. Her willingness to manipulate without remorse, to take whatever she could from anyone who offered it, was a side of her I hadn't fully understood before. One night, as she was laughing about some purchase she had made with our earnings, I found myself blurting out, "Do you ever feel guilty?" She looked at me, eyes wide, as though I'd spoken a foreign language. "Why would I feel guilty?" she replied with a shrug. "It was just business. He wanted to help me, and he did. We didn't force him to do anything." Her words hit me like a slap. I realized that, for her, this had never been about love or partnership. It was about what she could gain, and she had achieved her goal with a calculated precision I now found chilling. After another sleepless night, I knew I couldn't continue down this path. I couldn't ignore the reality that I had lost myself in her plans, abandoned my own values, and allowed someone else's life to be destroyed. I was done. I couldn't live with what we had done, and I couldn't stay with someone who was capable of such cold-hearted manipulation. The next day, I told Mia my decision. I explained that I needed to walk away from her, from the money, from everything we'd taken. She was stunned, at first trying to convince me that I was being irrational. "We've got everything we ever wanted," she insisted. But to me, the everything we had gained was worth nothing if it came at the cost of our souls. "No, Mia," I replied, finally resolute. "This isn't what I want. Not anymore." She looked at me with a mixture of shock and contempt as I walked away, her parting words ringing in my ears. In the days that followed, I took what little I had left and started fresh, away from the shadows of what we'd done. I cut off contact with her, determined to live differently, to remember the person I had been before I allowed myself to be drawn into such a destructive scheme.